If you haven't experienced a flight in a glider, then you still have one of aviation's great thrills waiting for you. And when that flight is conducted by a highly skilled pilot like Leroy Peterson of Fowlerville, well, it becomes not only enjoyable but also educational. We'll continue that flight in a moment, but first let's meet Leroy at his rural Fowlerville home, where he has his own 3,500-foot grass runway on which to operate his Grob-powered glider and another aircraft that he owns.
Leroy, we're going to do the story on powered gliders, and we are in your hangar here, but this doesn't look like a powered glider. I don't see any engine.
Well, okay, that's very simple. The engine is stored behind the canopy here.
Back over there?
Back in there. There's a couple clam doors that cover that up. So, being computer controlled, by merely pulling a little handle here, voila, we have an engine.
With a propeller on it?
With a propeller on it, exactly.
Okay, but that prop is straight up and you bring it down. What happens if the prop doesn't stop in a vertical position?
Well, okay, I can take the propeller here and take it out of vertical, and if I was up flying and I decided I wanted to store the propeller, I can illustrate the safeguards here. That's as far as it'll go.
So there's some sort of a computer mechanism?
That's correct.
Computer actually looks and says, whoops, it's not ready.
Yeah, there's a bunch of circuit breakers and sensors that says the propeller is not vertical, we're not going to let you store it. So, but by merely getting propeller back vertical.
But wait a while, you can't reach from the cockpit out there. How do you get it straight?
That's correct. But in flight, the propeller never stands still, or it normally doesn't stand still. So you have it's windmilling very, very slightly.
I see. And
I have a brake in here.
So you stop it vertical.
I can stop the brake in vertical, and then the.
Could you bring it back out one more time? What engine is it on there, by the way? What is that engine?
This is a Rotex engine. It's basically a snowmobile engine that's been converted over for aviation. It has dual carburation. It has dual ignition. It's 43 horsepower. It's belt driven. The propeller is belt driven, and it has a variable pitch propeller, electric.
Yeah, and the whole purpose of having the engine on a glider is what? To get you up in the air without having to have a tow or a launch, is that it?
Yeah, that's correct. In my particular case, I come down here and take off and land by myself at any time of the day that I care to, and I don't need to get another pilot and another aircraft involved in towing me up. So it makes you, it's a lot more versatile this way for me.
Do you also use it, say, when you're up and you can't find some thermals and you want to move around a bit?
That's correct. While you're up soaring, if you lose a lot of lift and there doesn't seem to be any in your particular area, you can start the engine, cruise 5, 6 miles, 10 miles, whatever, and then if you find some more thermal, then you can store the engine.
I know you began flying a while back, and you said you owned 3 or 4 Moonies, or was it 5?
Yeah, yes. I started flying in around 72, 73, and during the course of that time, I owned about 5 Mooney airplanes, and they were strictly cross-country aircraft that the wife and I flew all over the U.S. and the Caribbean and Mexico, Canada.
But with this airplane, with this sailplane, you aren't going to do that. So why the big transition from a very sophisticated Mooney, well, this is sophisticated also, but a high-speed merchant down to this?
Yeah. Well, this is just as challenging as flying to the Caribbean in a Mooney.
Probably more so.
Yeah. When you're up with this, and you, what you do is you come up with tasks. You take off on a nice day, and you say, well, I'm going to soar to Houghton Lake and back.
Oh.
So you strive to do this. I mean, that's your task for the day.
Yeah.
And you do everything you possibly can to do that. And your skills, your flying skills, are going to determine whether you make it or not.
Okay, Leroy, a lot of this looks rather conventional in a way, and yet I see strange instruments in here. I guess, whoops, you'll have to point them out to us. And
yeah, okay. Well, this has a lot of the normal instruments. It has an airspeed indicator here. It has an altimeter over here. And we have a G meter in here to tell us the amount of G forces that we're pulling. What's not conventional in here is we have two instruments here, and these are barometers. And what they tell me when I'm flying through the air, they tell me how fast the air is rising or sinking around me.
With relation to the sailplane?
That's correct. And this thing is from 0 to 10 knots of vertical lift, and there's also some 0 to 10 knots of sink. The air is going down. And if you're in sink, you want to get out of it very fastly because you're coming down. The sink is taking you down. And when you're in rise, what you do usually is you fly fast in sink to get out of it, and then you fly very slow in lift.
So you stay in the lift longer.
So that's correct. So you rise in the lift. Over here we have a brake, and this brake works on the ground and in the air. It works on the ground like a regular brake would work, and then in the air it works like this. And we can control the speed or descent of the aircraft by rising or lowering the brake. The aircraft doesn't have flaps. In a normal airplane, you put your flaps down to slow you down, and so you can fly slow. In a glider, during landing, that's a little different than a regular airplane, is that you do not fly slow in a glider landing. You fly at a fairly good clip. We fly about 60 knots while landing, and use the speed. Use this as a speed control, and also controls my descent.
Well, explanation's over. It was time to fly. Leroy was kind enough to give me the front seat in the tandem seating glider, and after a careful pre-flight, we started down the bumpy grass strip. Once airborne, the flight smoothed out and we rose gracefully in the calm air of the morning. And with that long wing hanging out there in a glide ratio of 38 to 1, you somehow felt safer and more secure than in a conventional light plane. We climbed up to 3,000 feet, circling the area south of Fowlerville. Leroy pointed out that you use more rudder in a glider than a conventional light plane and sort of hold it throughout the turn, and that the control inputs are very light, requiring only small, coordinated movements. At 3,500 feet, Leroy throttled back, and then a few minutes later shut down and stored the engine, becoming a conventional glider seeking lift to stay aloft, but finding very little help from the cool morning air.
We're slowly going down, but you know, we're losing about 100 feet every time we go around there.
The peculiar rising and falling tone that you hear is from this instrument that, as Leroy explained earlier, tells you if the glider is getting lift from the rising air currents. The louder and higher the tone, the greater the lift. So it's from this instrument That, as Leroy explained earlier, tells you if the glider is getting lift from the rising air currents. The louder and higher the tone, the greater the lift, so you don't even have to keep an eye on the gauge to know when the lift is there. And then came another exciting part of the flight. Leroy said, "Let's see what this thing can do this morning." And at that, both an onboard Spider that you'll see in a moment and I had an early morning wake-up call. Woo! Well, I'm not sure the Spider enjoyed the flight, but I sure did. And our thanks to Leroy Peterson for an enjoyable flying lesson in a glider.
Amazing. Tear the wing off.